on!
The wind shrieked through the trees like a dying beast, flinging rain in wild, violent sheets as thunder cracked overhead. Pines bent beneath the storm, their shadows writhing across the forest floor. Once familiar paths, now a maze of muck and wet bark. Somewhere in the chaos, a body trudged forward with trembling limbs, barely more than a silhouette themselves. Their phone was dead, their flashlight sputtered out miles ago, and every step felt like they were sinking deeper into a place they weren't meant to be. But ahead, barely visible through the downpour, was a light. The cabin looked like something out of a tall tale, all jagged corners and old timber, its chimney puffing slow curls of smoke into the stormy dark. The path up to it was overgrown, like no one had used it in years, but the light behind the round window was steady. Someone lived here. They staggered to the porch and knocked. Inside, Stanford Pines had already heard them approach. He didn't startle. He rarely did. Instead, he lifted his head from the page he was scribbling on, glasses slipping slightly down his nose, ink still fresh on a third sheet of equations. The cabin was warm, softly lit by lanterns and the ever-burning fireplace. It smelled like old parchment, pine, and something harder to place. Something coppery beneath the stew simmering in the grand iron pot over the flames. Stanford had been living on the outskirts of Gravity Falls for years, isolated by both choice and necessity. Officially, he was a retired researcher, renowned in many academic circles for his obscure discoveries in theoretical physics, cryptozoology, and interdimensional travel. He was a man who gave 1 or 2 interviews a year, usually stiff affairs in which he appeared uncomfortable and restless, and accepted awards with a wary smile before disappearing back into the woods without a trace. The locals respected him, feared him, and often gossiped about him like he was a ghost. What they didn't know was how much he liked it that way. Stanford Pines was a predator with a genius's mind and a scientist's patience. The kind of man who could catalog every herb masking the flavor of blood and calculate the exact decay rate of tissue in subarctic conditions. Who had spent enough time in isolation to let something inside him rot quietly out of sight. Years ago, when he first tasted human flesh, an accident, he told himself at the time, it had been a moment of morbid curiosity, but it hadn't stayed that way. It wasn't just hunger, it was fascination, reverence. He treated it like he treated every other obsession, methodically, with notes, tests, rituals. And he was good. So good, in fact, that no one had ever suspected a thing. People who disappeared in the woods of Gravity Falls were chalked up to strange forces of the region. Wild animals, cold, strange anomalies. Never him. Now he stood at the door, adjusting his glasses as the stranger's knock echoed through the cabin. They were soaked, clearly disoriented, alone, young. Everything about them screamed vulnerable. He hesitated just long enough to savor it, then opened the door. He said softly, as if he hadn't known they were there.
Well, now, that's a surprise.
His silhouette loomed in the doorway, long and broad, the lantern light behind him painting him in shades of amber and rust. His smile was polite, but not comforting.
You've gotten yourself good and lost, haven't you?
He murmured, eyes glinting just slightly too sharp behind his lenses.
Come in. It's a cruel night to be wandering.
He stepped aside with the grace of someone who had rehearsed this scene before. The kind of host who knew just when to close the door behind a guest and just how long to keep them seated near the fire before asking questions. The kind of man who had memorized how long it took someone cold and frightened to start trusting the warmth. They stepped inside. He locked the door with a quiet click.
I'll put on some tea,
he offered.
You must be starving. Make yourself comfortable. I don't get many visitors. Certainly not on nights like this.
He moved with practiced ease, boiling water, selecting leaves from a tin, stirring a pot on the fire that had been simmering long before they ever knocked. The scent of it curled through the room. He glanced at them only once, his gaze flickering from their dripping hair to the tremble in their hands. And then, quietly, he reached for a small jar. Inside, a dried herb, finely ground. He pinched some between his fingers, let it fall into the steaming stew like he was seasoning more than just the broth.
Stew's nearly ready. Bit of a personal recipe.
He said it casually, but his smile lingered a second too long. Not quite off, but studied, rehearsed. They didn't question it. Not the warmth, not the food, not the locked door behind them. He handed them the bowl with a kind of reverence, the way one might offer a gift, or present a trap that didn't quite look like one. They took it, hands still shaking, and ate like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days.
There we are. That's better, isn't it?
He didn't eat. He just watched, not with hunger, but with calculation, admiration even. Their eyes were dulled in the firelight, strands of hair clung to their cheeks, and when they finally relaxed, just slightly, he took note. Every subtle detail, every breath. He waited until they fell asleep, curled near the hearth, lulled by the heat, exhaustion, and whatever else he'd slipped into their food. And then he began his work.
Beautiful subject. Strong cardiovascular rhythm, precise symmetry of facial structure, unusually sharp ocular contrast.
He retrieved a journal from beneath a floorboard, leather-bound, fraying at the edges, and began to write. Pages filled with diagrams, notes, rituals, calculations of preservation times, anatomical sketches labeled with clinical coldness. They were his 47th. He'd kept meticulous records of the others, names if he'd caught them, physical traits, reactions, flavor profiles. But this one, there was something else. He paused over their page, pen hovered, uncertain. No hesitation, just interest.
You'll be the finest by far.
Outside, the storm began to break, but inside the cabin, something darker was only just beginning to take shape. The scientist returned to his desk, his movements smooth, collected. The chaos of the outside world couldn't touch him here. Not while the fire burned and the door remained locked. He glanced at the guest, still unconscious, their breaths soft. He smiled.
Rest well. It's more fun when you're alert.